Man, we're starting a brand new series. I love book studies. You can help a lot of people by going through topical type things, and there's a lot of immediate help that happens. But we grow deep as we begin to study books of the Bible and just see it within its context and get a feel for what it is. And so today, my privilege is not so much to dive deep into this book of Philippians yet, but to just get our mind where we can actually feel like we're there. We can smell what he smells, and we can see what he sees. And so my task today is to see the setting and the backdrop of everything that took place here. But we've entitled this book "In Search of a Silver Lining." Right? You know I love these pictures that have the cloud, and just behind it is that little sliver of light, which lets you know that gray cloud is, when it parts, man, there's nothing but sunshine there. And it's a great reminder to me that no matter how gray life looks, with Jesus, it's right there, right? And so if we can begin to see past the grayness of our life and see that silver lining, there's this peace that comes over us. There's this calm that begins to enter in. It's all about Jesus. It really is. It's that silver lining is what all of our mind's eye is always glancing for, looking in the distance, right? I mean, that's what was going on down in Florida this week with that hurricane that came through and all those tornadoes. I've never seen anything like quite what happened, where these tornadoes seem to be as active and dangerous as that hurricane. But they were waiting on that day when those clouds pass and they see that sun come up, because they know that hurricane's over. And if you've been keeping up like I have with Lieutenant Dan, he was one of those guys that decided to stay in the boat. I don't know if you kept up with him. They told us that he was fine this morning. Someone was hollering at his boat, hollering, "Hey, Dan." And he was there, and he was good. But he hunkered down and just waited this thing out, right? Just trusting the Lord. And this is what he said. It was a powerful reminder, really, of just that. His logic was, hey, in Noah's day, they got on a boat and they lived through the storm. I'm staying on my boat because it's going to let me live through the storm. And it's a good reminder, really, of really if we just step into this boat of Jesus, right? But the point of that story was just to remind us that everyone was looking to this. Everybody just wants to see the sun come out after some of these devastating storms that we've seen going on. There's too many lives that are surrounded by just gray, overcast skies. It's amazing to me how we can both be seeing and going through the same circumstance, and one person is thriving in that process, and another one is drowning in that process. And it's all about perspective, whether you see the gray or you see the silver lining. And so, man, my quest and my prayer today is that we would move beyond that. I had a good and close friend of mine pass away this week with a drug overdose, and it's just brutal. It's hard to see those kind of things, because you spend a lot of time encouraging each other, and it was I love that guy, but there was just this cloud that he could not get beyond, and I'm confident that he is today. I spent a lot of time talking with him about the gospel and about Jesus, and he had attended some of our gatherings, and so I'm confident that I know where he is. But man, life gets difficult, doesn't it? We tend to expect that life is going to be perfect when certain things happen, right? And so as soon as I get that better job, right? As soon as I get that job that gives me just a little more money, man, then life's going to be good. Or man, as soon as my husband just makes that little shift, or my marriage is going to be good when that takes place, or my family, right? Man, if I can just get my kid, right? And we tend to think in terms of those kind of things. We're always waiting. As soon as I get a raise, as soon as I get more money, right? As soon as I get over this health issue, right? These are the way we tend to talk to ourselves. Man, if I could just find that real friend that I need, and so we always expect perfect. And we think one day it will be. And I guess what Paul is letting us know is that day's already here. This is a change in mindset. And some of you, it's going to like it's going to just mess with you, because listen, life's not gonna be okay. It's okay now, right? And we need to know that. We need to know that this life is difficult. It might not get any better, but it doesn't affect how I see life. life is okay, right? We have to get to that place where we do that. The problem is that sometimes our circumstances get in our way, don't they? And so we look at all we can see is our circumstances, and all we can see is what we're looking at right now, and we don't like it. We can't see the bigger picture, and so we're just there. We're in that situation where God is right there with us. We just can't feel it, right? And so we let these circumstances get in our way, and it changes our mood. It changes our attitudes. We become less patient. We become more angry, right? These are the things that happen when circumstances don't go the way we want. Listen, I'm a control freak. I know what that's like. I love to be in control of what happens. I love to know before I go into a meeting how that outcome is going to go. I've already anticipated all of the objections to those things. I know how to work around that. I'm expecting, right? But yet there are those obstacles, and we just have to get over those things. And so it's our circumstances. But then sometimes there's people that mess us up, isn't it? I mean, sometimes you just got people, and you go, man, if they would just get out of my way, I could get something done, right? You do that, and it's easy to see that on the road, right? And so all we see is gray skies because I'm not the person in the lead in that fast lane, and so we let that kind of affect us in all of those things, and so we can let circumstances steal our joy in that sense. We can let people steal our joy, and listen, nobody can steal it. We really have to give it away in that sense, right? And then there's also stuff, right? Either I have too much stuff, I got to get rid of it because I can't take it, I can't afford it, or I got the wrong stuff, and I got to trade it for the right stuff, or I don't have enough stuff, and so there's this constant struggle that we find in life, so that what happens is we live in that in between where we're just almost satisfied but not enough, and so it's that gray area, and that's what we want to talk about today. Man, we're built for kind of an internal quest for sunlight. That's what we're built for, right? I mean, that's why you talk to most people. Where's a happy place? It's going to be at the beach, right, where that sunshine is. And for others, it's going to be on the mountain where the sunrise is, or the sunset, right? But somehow, it's that sun that tends to be where we find our happy place. And so it's the same way in life. We're built for wanting that. Paul writes a little letter to a little city, not so little, kind of prominent city in Eastern Europe. And he's giving them the secret to how to really understand and live life. It's a group he's known for 10 years. Philippi was the first city in Europe to hear the gospel of Christ. I love thinking about what that was like. I mean, Paul loved to go to those areas where nobody else had been. And so he's been in Asia Minor, and he's been working that area. And man, he just wants to. He's not through with that yet. But then we'll look at it in a minute. But he's drawn toward Europe, and so you think about that. And I was sharing with a buddy this morning. We were just talking about life, and I'm like, man, when you think in terms of the fact that how sovereign God is, and the power of the gospel, so that it started with Jesus in Jerusalem, and then it went to kind of Judea, and then it went to Samaria, and then the apostles began to take that in other areas, and then Paul himself did, so that it hit Europe. Well, somewhere in the course of time, it crossed and jumped the Atlantic, and it made its way to the USA, if that's where you're watching this from. And then it began to make it down to your area, and somebody told somebody, who told somebody else, who told somebody else, who eventually told you, if you're a believer in Christ. And you just think, man, the power of this gospel is amazing. So here we see the very first gospel-centered community right here in this city called Philippi. And so that's where we are. Philippi was founded by Alexander the Great's father, Philip, and it's a Roman colony. And that's a big deal because a Roman colony was different than just governed by Rome. It meant half the world, really. I mean, the known world was ruled by Rome. But if you were a Roman colony, you somewhat had your own government. You had a lot more freedom. It was a power city. And so this is what Philippi was. And, we're going to move into looking at Paul and his and how joyful he is. And so before we do, I want you to understand the circumstances of Paul's life as it relates to the fact that Paul didn't have it easy. And sometimes we forget that. And so it's important because this is the man who's going to write this letter to let them know, man, you got to focus on the silver lining. Life is not going to be okay. It's okay now. I'm going to tell. He's going to say to us, hey, rejoice. And again, I say rejoice, right? And so these are the things that we find in here. So Paul had a difficult life. I don't know if you know that or not, but Paul grew up kind of the pinnacle of what you would expect a Jewish man to be. If there was the cream of the crop, if there was the 1%ers in the area of the Jew, Paul was it. His name was Saul. God didn't change his name to Paul. Saul is his a Jewish name, and when he was called to be an apostle to the Gentiles, he took on the Greek version of that, and so it's Paul. And so there's no mystery behind what that happened. Like, God didn't change his name or any of that. He just knew that would help him relate more with the people that God had called him to, and so that's what happened. And so just like you'll hear a lot of Spanish people, I got a buddy named George. We used to call him Jorge because that was what the Spanish version of that is. And so it's no different. It's just simply that. And so Saul was a great persecutor of the Christians. He hated those people, and he held the coats of those who stoned the very first martyr of the Christian church, Stephen. Paul was right there cheering them on as they threw him down and began to stone him to death. And then Paul had letters from all the authorities so that he could chase anybody who was a Christian, chase them down, put them in prison, persecute them, kill them, whatever it was. And he's on the road to Damascus to continue that when he meets God face to face. And he's thrown off that horse, and he hears a voice. All the friends around him just hear thunder. But he hears God himself saying, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? Now, Saul knew who it was, because when he gets to that place, he calls him Lord, right? And so he knew who it was. And then Jesus tells Saul, I'm going to show you how much you will suffer for my name, because I'm going to make you an apostle to the Gentiles. And so Saul came to Christ that day. He was discipled by some people in the better way. He was blinded for a season, and then God told him to go down, and there would be a man there who would bring healing into his life, and so he did. And then Paul began a journey of being set apart for this gospel. And so we get Corinthians. Paul is writing to that church, and he makes some pretty open, transparent statements about what he's been through. And I just want to read them to you before we set up the stage to this whole church. But so this is what he says. It's in 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 7. He says this. He's speaking about this treasure of who Jesus is to us. And he says this, but we have this treasure in earthen containers, like in these bodies. We get Jesus, and we're a mess, right? But so the greatest thing that could ever happen to us, Jesus, the most prized possession of all, is in leaky vessels, right? He's in these earthly containers that are prone to cracks and leaks and all of those things. And he says, so that the ordinary greatness of the power will be of God and not from ourselves. He says this, hey man, right now, I'm just telling you, we are afflicted in every way. He said, but I ain't crushed. You hear that? Listen, he's been beaten. There's a lot of things going on here. There's hardly a reason for him to go, woohoo, isn't it fun to be a Jesus guy? He's getting pummeled for this. But listen to his perspective. Man, he said, I've been afflicted in every way, but I ain't crushed. I've been perplexed. There are times I'm like, honestly, I'm not sure what God's up to. But I'm not despairing. See, let's just hear this perspective, because so many of us are perplexed with life, right? We're praying these great prayers. We're praying for healing. We're doing all these things, and man, it feels like God's not even, why are things not happening? And then you got some bozo over there praying for a parking place, and he gets it, and they're all cheery and everything. And you go, man, I'm a little perplexed, God. I mean, what I was asking for is far more valuable than that. Paul ran into that a lot of times. There were times he had closed doors everywhere trying to figure out what's going on. But what does he say? I'm not despairing. You know why? Because he knows He knows who's in charge. And then he says this, man, I'm persecuted. And the whole world is coming at me. I got Jews coming at me. I got the Romans coming at me. I've got men and women who were in witchcraft coming after me. He said, I'm persecuted. But I know this, I ain't abandoned. There's one who's never going to leave me. You see how, before we even get to the letter, I want you to see, Paul is always seeing that silver cloud, because he says, I ain't crushed. Hey, I'm not despairing. Hey, I'm not abandoned. He said, man, I've been struck down. I've been beat. He said, I ain't destroyed yet. Right? I ain't dead yet. Right? So you even get to that point, right? But this is who he is. And then he goes on in this and gets to verse 10. He says, listen, I'm always carrying around in the body the dying of Jesus, so that the life of Jesus may be revealed in my body. He says, listen, man, I carry him around. My body's dying, but Jesus ain't. And so he's dying. I'm dying, but he's alive. And since I'm in him and he's in me, I've got no worries. Because what's happening is the more I die, the more people see Jesus. And then he says this, for we who live are constantly being handed over to death because of Jesus, so that the life of Jesus may also be revealed in our mortal flesh, how we respond to life. Listen, you know what changes and transforms the world when they're looking for Christ? People like you and me, who feel like we've been afflicted, we've been perplexed, and we've been persecuted, we've been abandoned. But it's just a thing. We still have hope. We still believe in Jesus. That confounds the world because it makes no sense. And this is what we see in this text we're looking at here. And then he goes on in a little further down in verse 17. I'm going to pick it up for you. He says this, therefore we don't lose heart, but though our outer person is decaying, our inner person is being renewed day by day. Hey, it may look like I'm falling apart. My life is. You have no idea. I'm just getting started. My body may look like it's wearing out. My circumstances may look like it's wearing out. My money may look like it's wearing out. My job may look like it ain't happening. But I'm telling you what is happening. Inwardly, I'm being renewed day by day. You see how Paul, he moves circumstances and people and stuff out of the way. And this is what we're going to be learning as we walk through this lesson. But listen to what he says. Verse 17. For our momentary light affliction. Now, there is anything but light affliction in Paul's life. We're going to read in a minute what kind of gives us a grocery list of what that was. But listen how he says that. These momentary light afflictions is producing for us an eternal weight of glory far beyond all comparison. While we look not at the things which are seen, but at the things which are not seen. He's like, you know where my eyes are? Not on that cloud. It's on what we can't see, that little silver lining. That's what he's saying here. But at the things which are not seen, for the things which are seen are temporal, but the things which are not seen are eternal. You know what he's saying? Hey, that gray cloud is just fluff. It's gonna fade away. You know what won't? That sunshine. And this is what he's saying here. Hey, listen, all of our stuff may fade away, but you know what doesn't? Jesus. This is so powerful. So then he goes on and he gets to 2 Corinthians chapter 11. This is his list. So hear this guy that's totally optimistic about what's going on in life. He's jazzed about all that. He's not denying the fact that stuff is terrible. You saw him. He confessed it all. But in the midst of it, he kept telling you the upside of it. We could have called this the upside of life, right? Seeing the upside of life. And so now listen to what he says so that you know how difficult this thing was for him. Chapter 11, verse 24, he says this, 5 times I received from the Jews 39 lashes. Now, that was a cat or a whip, really, of leather, and in it were pieces of bone and glass and whatever they could find. And you hit a man 39 times, you were ripping skin every time that took place. And so here's Paul. He says, 5 times they ripped my flesh to the bone. Wow. And he says this, 3 times I was beaten with rods. Hey, these aren't soft rods. These are hard. And then he says, once I was stoned, right? He got rocks being thrown at him. Rods are beating him in his back. They've ripped his back open 5 times. 3 times I was shipwrecked. Like, where are you, God? Right? A night and a day I have spent adrift at sea. A night and a day, he's just treading water, waiting for somebody to come by and see that he's out there holding on to a piece of wood or whatever he's holding on to. I've been on frequent journeys in dangers from rivers, dangers from robbers, dangers from countrymen, dangers from the Gentiles, dangers in the city, dangers in the wilderness, dangers at sea, dangers among false brothers. I have been in labor and hardship, through many sleepless nights, in hunger and thirst, often without food, in cold and exposure. Apart from such eternal things, there is the daily pressure on me of my concern for all the churches. And all of that, he goes, you know what's really pressing on me? You people. This is who's writing this book. Through it all, Paul has joy and peace. And so this is where we are. Now, got a Bible, turn to Acts chapter 16, and because this is where we find how the church in Philippi came about. It's a fascinating story. And so I just want to read it to you just so we can understand what's going on. So if you got a Bible, Acts 16 verse 6 is where we're going to start. Now, Paul's in Asia Minor. He's on the western shore of Turkey. That's the Aegean Sea, and he's wondering where the Lord's going to take him. And so he wants to go to Bithynia, which is north, because he feels like maybe I'm not finished with Turkey yet. But here's what it says. And let's read it together. He says, Paul and his companions traveled throughout the region of Phrygia and Galatia, having been kept by the Holy Spirit from preaching the word in the province of Asia. When they came to the border of Mysia, they tried to enter Bithynia, but the Spirit of Jesus would not allow them to. That's a crazy story. So, listen, there are a lot of times when you think this has got to be the will of God. Paul's doing the work, man. Yeah, I'm going to knock out Asia Minor. I'm doing it. But it was like, and so he's bumping against it. What would you normally think if you're doing that? You go, man, Satan's just not happy with me today. Paul understood this wasn't Satan that's blocking the road. This is Jesus blocking the road. There are times, some of your best ideas, best choices, the things you think is a winner, and God's going to be all over it. Sometimes he's going, that's not your journey, not today. And so I think we have to get comfortable with the fact that God is sometimes going to interrupt our life. Listen, I've seen that happen to me so many times. When we had a great church at one time, it felt like we were building this thing. It was growing. It was like crazy good. And there are people today that talk about, man, I've never found a place that was like that. And so, man, it was like, man, we're going to be doing this. And it's going to take off. And it was a great church until it wasn't. And you think, what was that? I don't know. God moving, right? And then we go to another, man, it's a great church. And then things start happening, and it was it just kind of like, Lord's like, no, you're done there, right? And then we've been like these nomads, just running from one building to another building. Now we're just hunkered down at the house. But still, I'm not discouraged either, because God is up to something. And this is what Paul sees here. And so he knows that, all right, Lord's not going to let him. When they came to the borders of Mysia, they tried to enter Bithynia, but the Spirit of Jesus would not allow them to. So they passed by Mysia and went on down to Troas. During the night, Paul had a vision. Now, here's where it gets good, right? Paul had a vision of a man of Macedonia standing and begging him, come over to Macedonia and help us. That's Greece. Macedonia is where Philippi is. And so you see what's going on. God's like, no, you're not going there. There's some people, and we're going to Europe, brother. You got to keep up. I got other guys. They'll take care of Bithynia. I need you to go to Europe, because you're my man to the Gentiles. And so this is what's taking place. So they pass, it says, during the night he had that vision. And it says, come over to Macedonia and help us. After Paul had seen the vision, we got ready at once to leave for Macedonia, concluding that God had called us to preach the gospel to them. He's like, they concluded, right? Well, it's pretty obvious. If you're not going to be able to go here because the Lord stopped you, and then you have a vision and a dream of a man going, hey, come over here, right? That's what's going on. Now, then, this is where it takes us. Now, this is how it happens. This is so good. From Troas, verse 11, we put out to sea and sailed straight for Samothrace. And the next day to Neapolis. From there, we traveled to Philippi, a Roman colony and the leading city of that district of Macedonia. Big city. And we stayed there several days. So they get there, they're hanging out. Now, they're looking for a place to go share the gospel. When Paul went to Athens, he went where all the religious, or scholars rather, the philosophers were, because he knew, hey, I can get into a discussion there. So they're waiting on a place to go where maybe some people are religiously minded to go and see what takes place. And so here's what happens. On the Sabbath, we went outside to the city gate to the river, where we expected to find a place of prayer. See, that's what would happen. If you were a Jew and you were outside of the Jewish area where you didn't have a temple, you didn't have any of those things that you could go to, you didn't have all of those things, then you would just kind of go by the river, right? And so this is what's going on. So Paul's going there thinking, well, I'll go to the river. Somebody's going to be there praying, because that's where people go. And so there they are, and it says this. He went outside to the city gate and the river where he expected to find a place of prayer. We sat down and began to speak to the women who had gathered there. Now, that's what happens. Women gather, and I mean, some of these were gathering to pray. Some of these were gathering because they had to clean their clothes, they had to do some things like that. And so some of the ones that were there were not Jewish women. They were just women of the city, and so they would go there, and that's what they would do, normal activity. And so this is what's taking place. Now, we sat down and began to speak to the women who had gathered there. One of those listening was a woman named Lydia, a dealer in purple cloth from the city of Thyatira. So here's this entrepreneur lady. She's got her purple. She's selling it. She's got her fabric. She's dyed it in this incredible purple color. She knows it's a big deal. It's the color of the year, whatever you want to call it. She's out there selling her wares, right? And so this is what she's doing. And it says, one of those, a dealer in purple cloth from the city of Thyatira, who is a worshiper of God. All right, a worshiper of God is different than a follower of Jesus. So then it says, the Lord opened her heart to respond to Paul's message, which was, Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. No man comes to the Father but by me. Paul's message would be, if you will confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord, believe in your heart that Christ raised him from the dead, you're saved. So he's preaching Christ to this lady who was serious about worshiping the Lord. The Lord opened her heart to respond to Paul's message. When she and the members of her household were baptized, she invited us to her home. And she says this, if you consider me a believer in the Lord, come and stay at my house. And she persuaded us. And so, listen, this is how God operates. She's got a house. She's got some money. She's got rooms for Paul and his companions to come hang out. It's a pretty large church. Eventually, this will be the place where the believers in Philippi gather. In the early churches, they didn't have buildings and they weren't looking for those things. They were more concerned with relationship and community, and so they would just meet in homes. And this is what was going on. Now, so he's got a believer. He's got one, right? He's got fisher for men, right? He's got it on the hook. Now, hey, she's caught. Now, she's going to turn around. She's going to be a fisher too. And listen to the faith of her. Hey, I want you to come stay in my house. She's all in. Hey, that was a nice little conversation. Let me think about it. She's like, no, I'm all in. You need a place to stay? Hospitality is a mark of the Christian life. And she already is displaying that. So then we get down to 16, verse 19, or 16 rather. And it says, once we were going to the place of prayer, we were met by a slave girl who had a spirit by which she predicted the future. She earned a great deal of money for her owners by fortune telling. This girl followed Paul and the rest of us, shouting, these men are servants of the Most High God who are telling you the way to be saved. So here's this demoniac individual who's a slave. These guys are profiting off of her because she can tell the future. And so she's through the demonic realm. And so she's doing this, and they're making a great amount of money. Paul is getting slightly irritated that she's just hollering and kind of calling him out to what he is, because he, like a lot of us, had rather ease into this thing and share the gospel on his own terms, not create a kind of a fuss, and that's what she was doing. And so it says this, she kept this up for many days. So, Paul comes out of Lydia's house. He's heading down the street, and all of a sudden, here the demoniac woman is again. This is, and she starts saying who he is, right? Servant of the Most High God, who's telling you the way to be saved. In the name of Jesus, Paul says, frustrated, I command you to come out of her. At that moment, the spirit left her. When the owners of the slave girl realized that their hopes of making money was gone, they seized Paul and Silas and dragged them into the marketplace to face the authorities. So now, man, Paul, here he is. He's rocking along. This girl's caused all kind of trouble. He freed her, and then the people who were making money off of her got mad, and they dragged him to the marketplace because they're going to have court. And so they dragged him to the marketplace. They brought him before the magistrates and said, these men are Jews, and they're throwing our city into an uproar by advocating customs that are unlawful for us Romans to accept or practice. Because for the Roman, Caesar was Lord. And so the fact that Paul is preaching Jesus is Lord is already stirring up some trouble. They made a fatal mistake, but we'll talk about that in a minute. So verse 22. The crowd joined in the attack against Paul and Silas, and the magistrate ordered them to be stripped and beaten. After they had been severely flogged, again, right? They had been severely flogged. They were thrown into prison, and the jailer was commanded to guard them carefully. Upon receiving such orders, he put them in the inner cell and fastened their feet in stocks. Now, when he's given the order that he was given to guard them carefully, what went with that was if they get taken, you're dying. So this jailer knew, man, hey, if I'm not careful and somehow they get away, I'm dead. So he puts them all the way in the middle of the jail, ties their hands, puts them in the stockade, and this is where he found them. Now, let's pick up this story, because this is amazing. I could preach this whole thing, but we're just trying to get our journey of Philippians down. He says this, about midnight. I'm telling you, you and me, a lot of us, we just got beaten. We just got thrown in prison. We're sitting in the middle, and we have no idea what's going to happen. We call that a gray cloud, right? Not Paul. Look at what he said. About midnight, Paul and Silas were praying and singing hymns to God. Oh, and the other prisoners were listening to them. So they got a crowd. Paul's like, hey, man, we got a crowd, right? It's funny how that happens. I remember my first trip to Belize. We were going to go to the islands and start a church, which is maybe why my love affair with the island was. We never made it to the island on my first trip because there was a hurricane that was coming through. It is hurricane season. And Hurricane Mitch, if they said had it been a scale beyond 5 on the deal, it would have been that. And so it's heading for us. And so instead of going to the island, we're hunkered down in Belmopon in the interior. And I'm just mad as can be, man. And I'm sitting around and I'm moping. I got my buddies with me, and one of them he had some heart issues, cardiosis or whatever, water around the heart. He was kind of recovering from that, and so we're just sitting in a house. And then I got to thinking, man, all these people are coming off that island. They're coming to the city, and the bus station with terminal was right there. So I grabbed my buddy John. I said, hey, man, you got to shake off that heart stuff. Get your guitar. We're going to the bus stop. We had English tracks and we had Spanish tracks, and we were just going to sing and help people with bags and start sharing the gospel. And, man, lo and behold, when that whole thing was settled, and I don't know if it's still true, but I preached to the largest crowd ever assembled in Belmopon, and I preached the gospel of Christ. They had nowhere else to go, kind of a captive audience, kind of like Paul's in this prison thing, only mine were encased because of the hurricane. But I began to preach the gospel, and at the end I gave an invitation. Man, half that crowd stood up. So me, of little faith, thought, man, they must not have understood what I said. So I look at the Jamaican pastor and I said, you give the invitation. So he stands up, gives an invitation, and almost 2/3 of the crowd standing by this time. And so, man, we spent the whole night one-on-one talking with these new believers in Christ. It was a crazy story. So, and this is what's happening. See, all I saw was the gray cloud until God gave me a minute just to think about what could happen if I'd quit pouting about not being able to go to the island. And this is what's going on here. Only Paul didn't even see the gray. He's just, hey, let's just sing, man. Let's praise God. We ain't got nothing else to do. And so everybody's listening. And the other prisoners were listening to them. Suddenly there was such a violent earthquake that the foundations of the prison were shaken. At once, all the prison doors flew open, and everybody's chains came loose. The jailer woke up. You got to know he is just, in a mess. He's looking around. Not only is Paul potentially gone, all the doors are open and all. He's thinking, man, I've lost every stinking prisoner in the whole cell. But that's not true. Listen to what it says. The jailer woke up, and when he saw the prison doors open, he drew the sword. Listen, he's going to kill himself. He goes, I know what's going to happen. I'm going to kill myself. I'm not going to go through the torture that they're going to do for me. And so he's pulled his sword out. He drew his sword and was about to kill himself. He thought the prisoners had escaped, and Paul shouts, "Hey, don't harm yourself, man. We're all here. We're still singing about Jesus." The jailer called the lights, rushed in, fell trembling before Paul and Silas. He then brought them out and asked, "Sir, what must we do to be saved?" Is that not crazy? In the middle of gray, Paul sees the silver lining. And then, man, that sun just comes out, right? They replied, "Believe in the Lord Jesus, and you will be saved, you and your household." Then they spoke the word of the Lord to him and all the others in the house. At that hour of the night, the jailer took them and washed their wounds. Then immediately he and all his family were baptized. The jailer brought them into it. Listen, he doesn't care anymore. He thought, hey, I'm not leaving prison. I'm taking them to my house. He took them to their house, to his house. Jailer brought them to his house and set a meal before them. And he was filled with joy because he had come to believe in God, he and his whole family. When it was daylight, the magistrates sent their officers to the jail with the order, release these men. The jailer told Paul, the magistrates have ordered that you and Silas be released. Now you can leave. Go in peace. Now, I'm trying not to have to preach this whole story, but let me tell you what happened. I told you they made a fatal mistake. Listen to what it says. It says, Paul said to the officer, "They beat us publicly without a trial, even though I happen to be a Roman citizen." Man, that guy's now quaking in his boots because you don't do that to a Roman citizen. Not in a Roman colony, you don't. You treat them with respect. They don't get beat. They don't get done like that. Not without a trial. And so this guy now knows he's in trouble. He said, "You threw me in prison, and now you just want to get rid of us quietly? No, let them come themselves and escort us out." The officers reported this to the magistrates, and when they heard that Paul and Silas were Roman citizens, they were alarmed. They came, listen, now they're in trouble. They came to appease them and escorted them from the prison, requesting them, not get out of here, but would you please just leave, because we're already in deep water. And it says this, and Paul and Silas came out of the prison. They went to Lydia's house, where they met with the brothers and encouraged them, and then they left. Now, so that's the story of this book that we're getting ready to look at. Now, I think 5 or 10 years have gone by, and Paul's in prison at this point. He's always in and out of prison. And so the church in Philippi sends a man named Epaphroditus to bring some gifts to Paul because they know he's in prison. You see this, man, they're just in love with him. And so they know that he's in prison. And so they just want to take care of him because that's what you did back then. It wasn't like they were going to. You had to get food and all that. It was on you in prison. And so Epaphroditus gets sick almost to the point of dying. He survives. And on his way back, Paul's written a letter. And he says, hey, take this with you, Epaphroditus, back to Lydia and have it read in that place. In this letter is rich words of wisdom about how to have joy and peace in the midst of everything going on. When we begin to believe behind every gray cloud, every gray day, every season is Jesus, that silver lining, it's a game changer. Worry and gloom and attitude, it goes away. Listen, if you could just get that. And I was having a conversation with Tamster this morning just about, man, I wish that we could help people who just seem to live in anxiety. There's no need to. If you truly believe that God is sovereign and that he's good, you don't have to be anxious about anything. And Paul demonstrates that through his life, and we're going to learn that as we go through this book of Philippians. It's a powerful book. You're going to know a lot of the verses in it. I learned it's four chapters, and I learned that Philippians is the legs of the Christian faith, and so you'll know it when I say it. Legs, acronym, right? Christ is my life. Christ is my example. Chapter 2. Chapter 3, Christ is my goal. Chapter 4, Christ is my strength. And you'll know these verses when we get to them because they're all familiar verses that you probably have already memorized. I can't wait to share with you through this book. It's going to be a great few weeks, months, maybe not a year, but maybe months. And so, man, stay tuned. Hey, here's what I'd encourage you to do. Just read the book. Right? Just read it. It's 4 chapters. It's 4 chapters. You could pull it up and let somebody read it to you on some app that you've got, and you'll finish it before you get to work. So just pull it, just get saturating with you. Let it do that to you. It's going to be a life-changing thing for us this season. So looking forward to that. Lord bless you guys. Here's a song to sing ourselves all on the way out. Lord bless you. Love you.